Mr.
Here.
I want to have this interesting conversation. What if we gave the gays their own country? But a part of me wonders, is that really such a bad thing? Like gays, like other forms of minorities, these people suffer from a lot of harms due to things that cannot be solved, things that they will never agree upon. These are irreconcilable differences that a lot of people will never find common ground. We believe that these people should be separated into different countries based on their ideologies and based on their shared forms of identity. We believe that these people can be separated, and we will allow a period of time where these people can move to countries that conform to their identities or conform to their beliefs and ideologies. We feel that this is absolutely possible. First, on the nature of big nations and why this is especially problematic. Big nations often push for a multicultural society, but there is a facet to that that's extremely negative. First, it forces people to live together. More often than not, this results in a corrosion of culture, where nobody gets exactly what they want, but rather people compromise on their culture, their shared beliefs, or they compromise on their tradition and sense of identity to form this weird mainstream culture that no one is quite comfortable with, in the name of finding a common ground. We feel that this results in many things. It results in people feeling oppressed, and this is why white supremacists are especially ardent nowadays, because they feel suppressed. We feel that these people should be separated from people that they will never agree with.
Yeah, how do you think the diplomatic ties between a wholly white supremacist country versus a wholly minority country, or a wholly conservative country versus a wholly gay country would be like?
We tell you first that the ability of these bigger countries to bully smaller countries changes, because you don't have the level of military might. We feel that these white supremacists, being the minority, because white supremacists are a minority within dominant culture, we believe that these people don't have the political capital to inflict damage. But even more important, these people are separated from the infrastructure of a large country. It means that they don't have the ability to hijack the military of a much bigger country to forward their aims. This means that people like Donald Trump, if they're elected president, will be president of much smaller countries and wouldn't be allowed to inflict the kinds of damage that they can. But also on the impacts of this assimilation. It results in civil wars. People often forget what created Pakistan and Bangladesh. So that at the point at which we allow civil wars to happen, rather than take preemptive measures such as separating people based on identity, we become morally culpable. We can avoid civil wars and the kinds of loss and the kinds of psychological harm civil war bring upon people if we separate them preemptively before conflicts can erupt, before feelings fester into things that result in armed conflicts. We believe that culture in and of itself is enough for people to derive joy from. Even if the economy goes to shit, even if these people don't have the technologies that they would otherwise have, we feel that is okay, because the metric of happiness in this debate is not necessarily centered on the wealth of the economy, but rather the capability of being who you are and exercising your right to your tradition. We feel that people derive joy from identity, meals that conform to their traditions, family which follow their traditions as well, norms of social behavior which they grew up with, which they are comfortable with. It is more important that these forms of collective identity and a sense of belonging is something that these people can enjoy. These people would rather have that sense of belonging in the material wealth that drives people to commit suicide, even because material wealth in and of itself is not enough. More important is a sense of belonging, and this breeds better patriotism as well. Also on morality, we believe that happiness for the most amount of people is extremely important in this debate. We avoid the mass of mainstream culture, and this is important because more and more people are feeling disenfranchised from mainstream culture. They had to corrode their own sense of belonging or their own traditions to fit into this mainstream culture. It means compromises on things such as their conservative beliefs, or compromises on their adoption of religion, or compromises where they can't even wear the hijab in public. We feel that these people had to compromise on some level of happiness to fit into the mainstream. I believe that given that we are assuming feasibility here, these people should be given the opportunity to adopt their traditions in an environment that fosters it, an environment that gives them full freedom to. without the pressures of mainstream conformity. Also on the economy, we believe that trade standards are not necessarily things that go to shit in this debate. We already told you even if they go to shit, it's fine, but more likely than not, they won't. We believe that things such as the European Union have frameworks that allow us to conceive that the economy won't go to shit. We believe that we can still create trade zones within these countries or between these countries with some shared body that governs these economic policies. We believe that like the European Union and their free trade, which allowed Europe to grow out of the Second World War, we believe that these things are possible and shared economic policies can maintain the economic feasibility of these smaller countries. And these countries have an incentive to maintain economic ties because it's really important for their GDP, but also when everyone suddenly breaks into smaller countries, you have an added incentive to compromise to allow for trade deals. We believe that these trade deals are things that are on shared goods that don't necessarily revolve around culture. Things such as trading gold. We believe that it also helps to stave off extreme ideologies such as white supremacy. Because these people more often form the loudest minority, we starve these people from the military infrastructure of these bigger countries, but we also allow these people some form of avenue. We isolate them from the mainstream, which is especially important. But also we isolate their victims from the victimizers. We allow these people to live separately from white supremacy. We won't force these people, these Native Americans or these black communities in the United States to live next to their oppressors, but rather we'll give them a separate state, which will allow them to be themselves, but will also free them from those kinds of oppression. But it's also harder for bigger countries to bully smaller countries. We believe that realistically, when China splits into a lot of smaller countries, you won't be able to harness the level of political capital you would need to lay siege to islands within Southeast Asia. We believe that it stops these bigger countries from bullying these smaller countries because we starve them from their military might, but also we split them into a lot of small countries, which means that it requires a huge amount of collaboration and shared ideology. More likely than not, it avoids extremists from hijacking that military might, but also increases the amount of safeguards. Because rather than convincing one leader, you have to convince multiple leaders to actually lay siege to outside. We believe that diplomatic bullying is reduced on our side, and minority oppression reduces as well. Proud to.
Thank you. Feasibility for I'm going to put down some of these
changes always happen, but doesn't mean any kind of changes everyone can adapt. And the same goes to here. When we are breaking up big country, people are going to have a very hard time to adapt with the new changes, especially India's side, on how that they say that this big country are going to be separated into this small country with a very common ideology and so on. Because let's see here, if this A country, they have, for example, this A country, there's like this kind of people, for example, gay people and so on. So this B country is a country consists of gay and so on. So how are they going to make a trade with within this country A and country B if both of them are not like with each other? And actually, this actually will cause a much more terrible civil war and so on. Instead of in our side, when we are maintaining the big country, we are also actually maintaining a good international relationship, as there will be Security Council and so on. And in terms of how their country managing the multiracial country and so on, they can manage it well, and so on. So into this speech, first I will rebut all of their points, and second I am going to give my points under the key phrase of governance. And then what we are going to prove today is that we want to prove that the big country is a very significant in order to help poor country. And our goal today is that we want to achieve the economic empowerment and also the stability in every country in this world. So first I would like to move on to my rebuttal, sorry. First, they say that on how they want to give time for these people to have time to conform with new country and so on. However, sir, given time to move here and there, and then they can they can adapt with the ideology and the society and so on. Actually, by doing this, actually will affect the security of the country itself. Imagine a big country breaking into small country. Yes, they don't have much military power. So how are they going to protect their own country at that time? They are going to have bad time. And if at that time there are people who take the advantage of this insecurity, wouldn't that cause much chaos and havoc, something like that? And then the second thing is that on how that they say metrics of happiness, on how that this is in their side, the metrics of happiness is how they can be themselves and not on how about the economy and so on. But here's the thing: if the economy is not stable enough, is having disruption and so on, it will still cause a disruption of the civilians' lifestyle, of how they are going to adapt and things like that. They will have problem with employment and they need to adapt with do things and so on. How are these civilians are going to have happiness, a good matrix of happiness at their side if we compare to our side. So end of our rebuttal. Now I'll move on to my first one, which is about the governance. Okay. So even though it is feasible to do this kind of thing of breaking up big country, how is it that it is a good thing? We don't believe that it is a good thing because it will give a very big impact to those small country and even the big country. Okay, first for the big country, how are they going to start? How are their business? How are they going to govern the country that already been break apart? They will be having a hard time to control the civilians in order to control the security, in order to use the resources that they have in order to build up again from the basic. And then on how the big country economy, they are big country economy, right? So basically a big country means a big population, right? So a big population means that when they are broken into small parts, into small country and so on, they will have a problem with employment. What I mean by employment is that, okay, we can see on how that people are being employed to this place and this country. When we are being break apart, it is very common, or it's a very general thing that we will think we want to employ those who are near us rather than those who are from other places. So, for example, before this country A, they employ people from country B. But then because of they being break apart, so for those from country B need to go out because I'm out of employment and things like that. So it will cause even a big damage in a very big scale, actually. And then in a small country too, they will have trouble because usually big country is the one that actually help this small country to grow, because they are giving the opportunity for this small country to build up themselves in order to become better. And before I move on, yes.
So when these big countries are broken up and resources are equally spread out, why can't these new populations now use these resources to economically empower them? Okay, let's say they use why they can't use the resources. How are they going to use the resources and things like that? It's like because in terms of how they are going to use this, like how they are going to choose what skills like mining, for example, mining. When we are mining things like coal and something like that, if we look at the Malaysian history on how when during Tanah Melayu once upon a time, when they want to mine things and so on, they take people from other country to help with mining. So with difference like that, so how are the people at that place who have the resource of mining going to mine if they don't have any technology or they don't have any expertise on this kind of thing? And it apply on all sort of things. And also it will affect the international relationship. So like this, we have like United Nations and so on. Like okay, we have a mutual trust between each country. But if this big country have been broken into small, but how are we going to trust this country? And it will cause it will cause this kind of trust. It will cause a trust issue because we will have a part that okay, we at first trust this country as a whole, right? Okay, this country is a very good country. But then when this country is being divided into a small country, so which one of these small country is actually the country that will benefit us to help us in terms of difficulty and so on? So yeah, to summarize, basically we have proof on how that big country is very significant in order to help small country, and how that it will give very big damage to our world if this is going, if this motion is proposed. So with that, we are proudly to oppose. Sorry.
Thank you. We have the
Growing up in Bangladesh, I know one thing for certain: Pakistan was super fucking oppressive. since the beginning, when India and Pakistan were divided, Bangladesh was a part given up to Pakistan, and therefore we were part of the big Pakistan, aka West East Pakistan. I think so. So being the part of that part of Pakistan, what essentially happened to us was our culture was taken away from us. The ability to speak in Bengali was taken away from us. We had to conform to the mainstream, what we call that language, which is Urdu at that point of time, and we do not want to do that. These are the kind of oppressions that systematically have been put down by big nations in the name of the mainstream, mainstream culture, in order to make everything much more simpler. But what happens is it takes away the rights of those minorities who want to self-actualize with other forms of expressions, which is by speaking in Bengali perhaps, which we bring out that before what we have the liberation war going on in 1971. Without this liberation war, what we propose is we have to look at this problems straight up and see that we have differences, and those differences cannot stand together. Therefore, we have to split up as nations, because this splitting up is essential, because not only did Pakistan steal our, language at that point of time, they were being oppressive. They were treating us as super minority, taking away our stuff, but not giving us anything back. Why did I say that? They are, no, let me just finish what I'm saying. So they were taking away most of the rights. People who were trying to even push forward to speaking for Bengali, they were killing them oppressively. They were taking away their rights. The marches were stopped and halted. These are the kind of oppressions that big nations bring just to introduce, just to maintain the mainstream culture around the places, right? And this is really oppressive, and this is really bad. This is why before the war happens, we want to bring up these countries in order to have a safe place for these countries to exercise. Yes, sure.
Yeah, who's going to determine the lines by which these countries have borders?
Yes. So historically oppressed minorities are the favored people here, and they get more rights. When separated. So if a country is more historically oppressed, okay, Bangladesh, we get access to more of the resources, and therefore our resources are prioritized, and that becomes that is the metric that we're setting. And also, speaking about the economic bodies and how that works. See, when we put out the idea that splitting up countries will split up the economic resources and everything, but what we tell you is the trade standards will still be there, which is told by the PM. Trade standards such as EU can be there, the economical bodies can still be there and govern all, maintain trade and everything. But what will happen here? The big countries will be dissolved. Therefore, the super bullying of the big countries that we will stop trading to you because of this and these reasons. That kind of bullying will not happen, because what we see is when these countries are big ass countries are dissolved. What happens is the smaller countries get more of a power, because they do not have to be bullied by the bigger countries and their powerful resources and their military. Oh yeah, speaking about military oppression, see, we are creating a leveled field of thing, right? why are we saying this? Because when you do not have like a strong coalition, military and stuff like that, or what happens is that you do not have that power to oppress other like smaller countries, and especially the minorities that get oppressed within these regions. The military does not get to oppress the smaller countries because since now you're independent, you have to come under a more peaceful forum. Therefore, like create a more a military alliance like NATO. No, a military alliance like NATO, which would much be more, which is what we're proposing, because smaller countries have together military, but that military is something. And also, speaking about international, what do you call it, pressures from these big countries. See, countries like China can't veto anything against human rights anymore, because when it's dissolved, not all of China wants to, what do you call it, go up against human rights violation within the UN and everything. Therefore, we believe that when we dissolve these big countries into smaller countries, big nations to smaller nations, they lose that like power that they had to veto, what do you call it, these human rights violations and everything. Yeah. Also, to get back to their case, what we see is that we also solve the problem of white supremacists, which is very simple. We give them their separate place because they are a minority, right? We give them their separate country and everything. But since they now are dependent and ripped off of military and everything, they have to depend on the other countries in order to get those resources, like the military, economic funds, whatnot. Yeah. They have to depend on those other countries to get those things. But what will happen is, since they are not historically oppressed by this, the metric will be fair enough for the other oppressed countries to like work better within these separate countries and everything. So yes. So what we're telling you is that the amount of happiness people will be getting out of this separation is very much to be noticed here, because the amount of happiness that we get is they get their individualities, which are not always shared within big nations, which are more often than not like put onto by big nations. So therefore, we believe that it's very necessary right now to look at these big nations and solve their differences by separating them. Yeah, sure.
So if you claim that a lot of states decide to split up because they have differences politically and cannot reconcile each other, what is their incentive to try to have military benefits or economic benefits with the same countries that they seceded from as well?
They don't have to have military benefits from the same countries. Like, not always do they have to have the same benefits from the same military. They can opt into other military, other countries' military coalition and everything. But that depends on that country's point of view. But what we're doing is we're liberating those countries, and that is really important right now, because those people need liberation, and that liberation comes at the cost of separating them up from that big country, which are actually not so much helpful, because they're at the end of the day, they are being oppressed, they are being put down, and they are being not given equal rights in the first place. So our metric works in a very good way, because what we end up doing is we end up helping out those historically oppressed minorities by giving them better stuff from the separation, right? So insofar, just separate the big nations. It's not so much good to have these nations. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have the other please?
Imagine yourself living in a country where you're already normalized being supported by the country's regimes, where everything is like subsidized, and you're already in tune, you're really harmonized with other difference in culture and cultural diversities, right? So what we're talking here is a big countries that have lots of culture inside it, right? And when they are talking in a country that have lots of culture, and therefore we think that we're talking about those countries that can actually cooperate with each other. So before I start my few points I have here, I have a few responses towards the government side. Where the first issue is that the quality of life of these people itself, or the metrics of countries that they're talking of, and second is their economic power, and third is small countries being bullied by these big countries who don't know it's true. I think let's not go with these small countries being bullied by these big countries. But we think this is not true because to put it simply, when these small countries under big countries, they are already found being hurt by these big countries. That means in terms of military power, in terms of like economic power, they are being hurt by this big country. But this country already providing them when they are under this, when they are in the same region, right? So technically they are providing this military power. So everything is being established where everything is already inside. The country. So the thing here, the problem is that when they are breaking up this big country, we question them how are you guys going to get more protection for these small countries, right? Because technically when they started a new country, this protection of this military power is going to become weak. And the thing is, the problem with their stance of saying that we should make a country of the same ideology and the same culture. The thing here is that when we have these white supremacists living in a country where they can actually do, where they do not have like other culture to actually like where they do not interact with other culture. This what somehow will like lead to radicalism, where they become too extremes, right? Technically they can just do whatever they want. So thank you. Technically they can do whatever they want. So it will like somehow lead to like extremisms where they can like somehow interject like other countries. So we think this is very problematic to even begin with. And we still think that these big countries are not bullying the small countries, but in fact, they are doing probably very well. The second is the quality of life they are talking. And they are talking about this how metrics of happiness inside this country, where they can get their individuality, and etc. We think this is not true. Why? Because the quality of life, we look at in terms of what you can get to become a better individual, right? Technically, what you can get from a country for technically like subsidies, or for example like economic power and like the protection that you get from the country itself. So how can you like give a better quality of life just because they can get their individuality and like the same ideology? Because we think even though you can get into a country where you are living with someone that is like they have the same ideology and culture as you, but you do not get the protection, and also you can't like boost yourself in terms of like job occupation, because we're talking about economic power. Sure, they do have resources in their own country when they are breaking up into smaller parts. But why do we say that it's very hard for them to get up into a higher level? I mean, like they can climb the economic ladder because of it's very hard for you to actually start from scratch, right? Because technically, you are a small country, you don't have the support from the big countries, right? When they were talking about this free trade, how it's like somehow feasible, we think it's not true. We think it's not true to a certain extent, right? Technically, when you are in a country that have like, for example, this white supremacy is for example, think about it. When a white supremacy in a country where they are like somehow governing their own countries, do you think it's still feasible for these countries to do like trade, like economic trades with them? Before I move on, sure.
Even if there is no trade, it's fine, because we see communities like the Amish be completely self-sufficient. These countries can, to a certain degree, be self-sufficient. Why is it still a problem then?
Because technically, in order for you to become a well-known established country, it's not that you only need to be self-sufficient. You also need to do like international relationship with other countries, like in order for you to become established an established government. The thing here is that in order in the achievement, like the end goal of you being government is that you want to be the best compared to other the government. So technically, you also need to like somehow maintain an international relationship with other government. So technically, if you become too radical and you become very racist with other countries, technically, like you have a whole country of yourself. The whole country of yourself, where you do not want to cooperate with other countries. So we think that is like somehow some sort of that is like problematic to even begin with, right? And then so let's move to my to the essential of my first point, which is the governance, like how we're going to start the government to even begin with. We think this is problematic. Why? Because technically, yeah, sure, you do have this all resources that you want from the beginning. But the thing here is that the thing here is that the problematic part is that when it comes to political power and how you're going to divide the political power. So technically, if you're under a big country where you already have this whole political campaign, and like when you're breaking up into a smaller country, I think it's going to be like lots of there's lots of riots, and people like and people will like go against their leader if they don't really like who's going to govern this the country, right? The thing here is that when they talk about how it's going to stop civil wars, I think it's going to be more civil wars on their side compared to our side because of people going to go like against each other when they are exchanging the political power, right? Secondly, when they talk about how they're going to like determine the border line, and they talk about how historian that going to somehow going to determine the border line. We think this is how it's going to be the most direct part, right? The most correct part. Because the thing is, a historian does not think about in terms of economic. We just think about this history that we had back then because of the culture clash, right? We think that in order for it to boost as a country, is that the most important thing is economics. But engaging with their points of metrics of happiness, we say the metrics of happiness going to happen more on our side because they get more protection, they get more their job options, their jobs are secured on our side compared to their side. Sure, they do have their resources and also their own resources, but then the thing is that it's quite hard for them to start all over again. Everything is not feasible for them to have a matrix of happiness and also protection.
Thank you. Anyone else is going to go Hey, member of the
The pursuit of power by the United States, China, and Russia to become gigantuous hegemons has not only brought smaller countries down to its knees, but lock out minorities. The government will enter this debate with two new pieces of contribution. Why populations in smaller nations will experience greater political empowerment, and secondly, why it is important for us to break down on the continuous rise of hegemons. Let's first engage the clash in the opening. What we hear from opening opposition and in some POIs from closing opposition is that if you form these smaller nations, no one will want to trade with you, and if you have to deal with white supremacists, what's going to happen to all these small countries that now suddenly are flooded with minorities? Two responses to this. Firstly, we think it's reasonable to suggest
that when you are now a smaller nation and possibly filled with just minorities, you are more likely to trade with countries that are politically aligned with you. And also because we think it's fair to assume that when these big countries are broken up, if there are resources that are held by the federal government, that these resources will be equally distributed to the existence of these new countries. What are we likely to see what will we likely see in change? We think countries like Tibet, Hong Kong, and Taiwan are more likely to trade with each other given their political history that they share. We also think that the new forms of resources that they now have in control means that these minorities in their new governments will be able to use resources like oil resources, natural resources to, for the first time, cultivate an economy that largely benefits them and does not always have to come to the exclusion of other minorities that they currently face in status quo. We think the comparison on their side is that all these minorities now either at best have to take menial jobs in these economic sectors, or at the very least, even if they wanted political empowerment, it comes from one or two politicians like Clarence Thomas in the United States Congress. We think, why not have an entire government that is filled with African American politicians that you can trade with with other countries because of the legitimacy that is now given to you as a result of you becoming a sovereign nation. Secondly, let's talk about like this white supremacist thing, because I really don't get why suddenly now, if there are a bunch of white people in one country, would suddenly go and threaten other countries. Because you know what happens when you do that? It's called an act of war. Why is that likely not to take place in status quo? Because when these countries now exist in new countries, you can't just go to another nation and say we're going to threaten and send missiles to your country, because we think that kind of threat is likely to receive more scrutiny and punishment from the international community, like the fact that countries are likely to put economic sanctions on these white supremacist countries because of how radical that they are seeming to be. That's why we see now currently in the European Union, many countries don't want to cooperate or have trade deals with Hungary because of their increased radical populist policies. We think on the comparison to their side, African American individuals who continuously live in a state of plunder because they are unable to actually gain economic empowerment and have to always be at the behest of these white supremacists, we don't think it's necessarily true for them to just suggest everyone will want to come and threaten you with an act of war. No, thank you. On to argumentation. Why will populations in smaller nations have greater political empowerment? What does the political landscape in large countries look like right now? We think they have three key features. In the United States, with the two-party system that has continuously only benefited white individuals who have been able to opt into these party systems. That means actively participate in donations, actively participate in protests. The reason why we don't see many minorities participating in this political system is because the political system is built to keep them outside of the system. How do we see this? We see this through racial gerrymandering that's taken place very recently in the case of Between Hill against Virginia Board of Election, where a court case was brought up because the Virginia Board of Election drew district lines based on racializing factors. We think that means that the minorities have continuously been excluded as a result of effective policy in that state. We think the comparison that we're likely to see on our side is an absence of racialized district lines, because these countries are likely to only be populated by that certain type of minorities. But secondly, if you look in India, when you look at the Congress party or the BJP party, these parties are constantly filled with those who form the highest in the caste system. That means Hindus like Brahmins, and these are individuals who are most politically empowered. What do we see as a result of that? You see an exclusion of those who exist in the lower parts of the caste system. That's why, in a comparison, when you look at states like Kashmir that are predominantly Muslim, these are also autonomous regions that receive the least amount of economic welfare and economic development. But thirdly, we think as a key feature, these big countries like China also, because of their CCP party, means that many other individuals who are aspiring to different forms of political modes don't get to achieve that. Things like democracy means that individuals like Li Xiaobo are going to be clamped down in prison in their work. We think the comparison is these are continuous minorities that for far too long have shown a trend to be continuously oppressed as a result of the domination of these large countries. How will this then change on our side? We think three things would change differently. But before that, a PY.
So that racism still exists. If I cannot enforce that racism through laws anymore, would I not use that enforce that racism through economic ties or political ties with the neighboring countries?
So it's harder for you to just say you will enforce your racism through economic ties, because countries need to depend on economic ties for some type of development. So that means you're more likely to trade with a country that is still with African Americans than you are in your own country, because you realize that you still receive the largest benefit of economic development on your side. So you don't have a reason to care for the minorities on your side, but because you have more reason to care from the benefit of a trade deal, you're more likely to trade with them as a result of this. But three things that will change on our side. Firstly, because there's a reduction in the size of the population, the barrier of entry into politics changes. How do we see this currently in smaller nations? Look at nations like Denmark that have minority politicians like Jagmeet Singh as an MP in the Danish parliament. These are individuals that aren't likely to enter politics in countries that have large majoritarian individuals that overpower because of the sheer size of their population. But secondly, we also see you don't need as much resources to cultivate that kind of change. Why is that true? Because if you look at the United States now, you probably need resources to go across 50 different states in order for you to gain some kind of support. But we think that changes drastically on outside because you don't need as much resources to cultivate some type of change. But finally, it's also easier for you to bring the type of change because in smaller nations like Iceland, the moment women wanted equal amount of pay, all they had to do was take a day out of working and not go to work. That means for an entire day, half the workforce was there. Half the workforce was not there. That was enough to pressure the government to make them realize that they had to consider these individuals and the concerns of these minorities. We think as a conclusion to this, it is extremely important for you to consider the reparations and also the principal justification for why you need to care for the minorities, which we think for the first time will happen on our side. But very quickly, why do we think you don't get hegemons on our side? Because at the moment, the United States and China are constantly in a tussle to control as much of Northeast Asia, to control as much of Southeast Asia. We think that drastically changes when you break up these states because you remove the incentive for them to create hegemons because they don't have possibly the benefit of a large military or they don't have possibly the benefit of great amounts of natural resources. So we think countries like Japan and countries like South Korea are unlikely to be bullied as a result of the concerns of these big hegemons. Very proud to propose.
Thank you. Can we have a member of opposition, please?
The subservience you see now of underdeveloped or developing countries to more privileged developed nations will only be exacerbated in magnitude in the government world. I will first take up the speaker before me in 3 responses before arguing about how you pit states against each other and create even weaker minority states in their world. But first, let me deal with the speaker before me. So, but their basic premise is that if you are smaller, you therefore have more empowerment. I have 3 levels of response to this. The first thing is that when you say that this is came out from the member of government, right? That you will only start to trade with countries that are politically aligned with you. So, for example, Tibet, Hong Kong, Taiwan will only trade with each other. Can you see the flaw in that? That the fact that they're only trading with each other means that you will only have a limited ability to have economic gains because you only want to trade with people who are culturally similar to you. But the second thing is that OG's model assumes that everyone who is politically aligned will end up in one country anyway. This means that you have singular states with singular ideologies. So we don't think you actually have enough countries to trade with to begin with. And we also say that that's just purely not enough. You will always have to end up trading with more powerful states or states that are more politically unaligned with you, which we think that you are always on the back foot in that sense. But the second level of response is that basically what they said is that you always benefit white majorities or majorities in their country by enforcing laws. The first thing I said was already in my POI, right? So if you cannot enforce those laws, then racism doesn't stop to exist. They will still do so in enforcing through economic methods, right? And they can say that they'll have trade deals, but that doesn't assume an immediate benefit. We think that you use those trade deals to put those people on put those countries on the back foot. Because if you are already currently privileged, it means that you already have the amount of resources, meaning that you have more leverage against smaller countries that are already minorities and already oppressed in the back foot, right? This means they will actively use these are the TPPA, these are economic trade deals that actively put or bilateral trade deals that China can put Hong Kong on a further back foot on their world. So we think that economics will be used to oppress. But the third level of response is that this idea about how current minorities cannot be politicians in our world because they are always going to be overwhelmed by majorities, right? But that's really harmful, right? If they end up being politicians in their small states, it means that they are more likely to be oppressive, given the fact that these are states are now singular parties, right? Or parties that there's no diversity. Because in that state, there's no one to go against these parties compared to in a bigger state where there's a huge amount of diversity and there's more ability to control each political party party and at least have a voice in your world, right? In your world, you will have minorities in those states, but they will be actively oppressed because they have a smaller voice compared to right now, where even though you're a minority, you still have a bigger voice because you have a bigger collective in our world. But here's where I deal with most of like OG as well in my argument on how you end up pitting these countries against each other and as a result create even weaker minorities. Before that,
even if, right, these bigger countries want to press, these bigger countries lose their capability to veto in the first place. Because as we mentioned even earlier on in the debate, China loses its capacity to veto anything that gives Taiwan legitimacy. Why then does oppression still happen?
No, because your big countries will still be big, because given the fact that your model says that all people who are politically alive will end up in a single country, you will still have ability to veto. And like, why are you even having like big regional blocks, right? If you think that there's like your principle is that smaller countries must have more autonomy, then like your regional blocks that are racist, like the EU or like ASEAN, will still have control over you, and you will have less of your autonomy. You don't get your benefits on your side. But let's look at like my extension, right? The first thing I want to deal with is this image in OG's head, right? The implied model that they have is that it's a big cake that you slice up evenly and everything becomes really small. And like that's what their benefit of like strangling the military might is contingent on. But you cannot assume this, because first of all, they didn't say this directly. What they did say directly in their mechanism is that you would allow the most amount of people to like form a country as long as they identify with that state, right? But that means that the likelihood of the most privileged will end up with the most land, or end up with the most power, right? So if you're heterosexual, if you're light-skinned, if you're ableist, you're more likely to end up in a bigger amount of land, and therefore also have more power, right? Even if that land is small, the amount of power that you concentrate in that area is more, because they are already more privileged. This means that if you have a dark-skinned person who wants to stay on that land, because maybe that land is sacred to them, you will end up being pushed out, because all those people will say that you have your other country to go to, all the African Americans are there, why don't you go there, right? This means that it's more likely to have like more discrimination on diasporas of these people who don't necessarily identify with a single race. But here's where we say that even if military might is lesser, how you determine that military might is dependent on your political ideology. There are three levels under this. The first is this idea about like really racist, really white supremacist people, right? Let's assume that Trump is in power, right? Or someone similar to Trump is in power within that world, and all the voters within that state are likely to be fueled by the same hatred that we currently see in the alt-right, right? Or in like, because like all these political alt-right people make up their own country. This means that even if I have a small military might, I still want to materialize that hatred, and therefore I will use that military might to like try and encroach on other countries, right? The comparative is having a like huge state that you can at least control these like extremists within your state, and the minorities will therefore be more protected, because minorities actually have a voice in our world compared to yours, where you are literally a separate nation who has no ability to control the ideologies of a racist nation, right? But the second level analysis is the power asymmetries that you create, right? So like I said, currently oppressed people still oppress, so they don't have enough. They don't have like enough substantial power or purchasing power. They still don't have enough. So this means that there's an active incentive to actually harm these individuals, right? This means that like Native American lands would still be landlocked within like large countries, that like other Native countries now have an incentive to suck out money from those areas. Then the comparative is that even if you're a Native American land and you are still poor, at least like a bigger pool of taxes will still enter into your country compared to your inability to create yours, because you literally had no technical skills to begin with, right? Your states will be harmful in your side. The premise is that at least you don't have a motivation for these countries to compete with you compared to our world, but you actually have an incentive to actually give some help to these Native Americans, right? But the last thing I would say is that like literally you give an incentive to encroach on land. The two premises is this, right? The first is that governments that are aggressive right now, like Russia, are still aggressive, but also like now they're aggressive but have limited amounts of land. This means that they're more likely to encroach on neighboring nations because they want to get more oil, they want to get more like energy within their world. This is things like the Russian army actively invading the Chechen Republic of Eritrea was more likely to happen, and you always see conflicts and flare-ups, right? Even if you have a smaller military, you'll see more often like you see more military conflicts and small conflicts that end up like this destabilizing the whole region. But you also have inability to control those countries, those aggressive governments, because like you literally are like completely politically unaligned with them, and you're unable to like have any diplomatic ties with them.
Thank you. So we have Dr. Mukti here. President.
No, later, after my speech. After my speech. It's cool. So, for those majority that are able to enjoy the resources, it's good for them. But the ethnic minority in the US is left out being lacking of resources and not able to live with their life in status quo right now. I'm first going to deal with fiscal reforming before going to opening position. Firstly, you have to understand, right? Like the hegemon that Dave had told you, like we want to become stranger. This means that US, China, India have the incentive to militarize because they want to become stranger, right? This means that this suspicion creates a regular instability. This is when police dismisses the argument that they told you, right? Because China and US always pressure South Korea to take trade deals or listen to the policies when dealing with North Korea. What's the comparison? Or like, listen, because South Korea and North Korea can normalize without the military force to begin with, right? This means, and the other thing is like Saudi Arabia and Iran, for example, wanted to always fight for the Middle East because netizens are become smaller. This means that US, and the other thing is that US has intervened with the Iran system since the military, and we want to stop that on their side. First, I'm going to deal with Felice's extension. This is that they will do racism by law on our side, according to Felice. We think that the reduction of population, then you need to cater to all people. This means that if they want to keep in power, they have to cater to all people to begin with. On our side, because of having the blessed people, that means that the majority that exists in status quo right now is now smaller. That means that the people on power right now have to cater to the minority to keep in power. On your side, they cannot fight against you. The second thing that they told you is that trading will only with each other, like Tibet and Taiwan whatsoever, and they'll trade with bigger country anyway, according to Felice. But it's a comparative, right? Both sides small country will trade with bigger countries. But it's about which side actually prefer it to be worse. The country in smaller country, the country which is smaller in scale on our side, Felice, even if they trade with the bigger countries, on a comparative, they're less oppressed, they're less bullied by, for example, North Korea on whatsoever, because they don't have as much as power on our side, right? And this last thing is that they talking about European Union and ASEAN, we're okay with not having that at all. We're okay with that, right? And then the next thing that they said is that there are more or less privileged people and they have more land. I think this is untrue and dismiss Dave's argument, right? Because on our side, the minority don't have the resources in status quo, and in status quo, minority don't have the resources. On our side, they have better resources. They have the hatred that Felice told you. It's easier to be mitigated on our side because the power is bigger on our side, especially the minority is now like more compared to the majority. On our side, the last thing that that Felice told you is about Russia. I think Russia will be weaker because they have less land and less power to be go to. That's why it's very it's less likely to occur on their side, right? The last, I'm going to deal with opening opposition. The first thing that they tell you is that adaptation will be less likely to happen. I think adaptation will happen eventually. It may be slow, but if it means that we prevent the power of white supremacists against the other minority, for example, and that's okay. Okay, in short term, maybe the countries will go through a more difficult adaptation, but it's one thing that's going to end in the end, right? It means that in long run they're adapted, and the difference is that they're more likely to be peaceful on our side. Even if white supremacists exist, the power is now smaller as a result of being in different countries, for example. The African American on our side is less likely to be hard compared with side position, because right now the white supremacists can still attack the minority, for example, the African American on their side. That's the comparative that they have never want to understand, even with imposing opposition, right? The second thing is that they asserted that the management will be better in the bigger country. I think this is untrue because they never give us a comparative between side government and opposition, right? I'll tell you it's not true because Dave had told you that the stuff in that country will spread equally, right? This means that they will be able to elect new leaders that leaders don't need to take care of a super big US, for example, right? We think that that's why the ethnic minority in the US will be more like us, that has never been treated very well on side opposition, will not be catered into because they not have the capacity to cater to them. On our side, there will be new leaders that can cater to them better because the majority is now reduced. More likely to be here on our side, there will be more stuff that can exist, right? And there's some small stuff that OO told you is about the employment. I think it's not very important, like more likely to exist on our side since we create another country, and the only way for you to make the country to be better is to create an incentive so that the country can be peaceful. So you will create a better job incentive. And the last thing that the opposition as a whole told you is that they don't have anyone to trade with, right? This means that I think it's unlikely, right? Like if a country has a lot of oil and oil source, why don't have gold, and a country B has gold but don't have oil, then they'll do a trade because they need each other. It doesn't necessarily because they're racist or whatsoever. I think they're straight trade anyway for the sake of the better of the country. I think it's just untrue for police to assert that on their speech, right? And then the last thing that they told you is that, and also when they're separated and they need each other, they'll be able to incentivize to trade with because they need each other, right? This means that it's untrue. They'll be left out and not having anyone to trade with. But before I continue, I'll take closing.
Right. So all this is contingent on the economies of these smaller countries actually functioning. But smaller countries may have economic trade deals with bigger countries, but they're more likely to import rather than export. More likely to rely on manufacturing because they have lesser skills than more privileged countries. Okay. How does this help diversify the economy? You
can only win that argument if you can prove to us that the economy won't work on our side. Because I don't think you prove that at all on your side, right? We have to you, right, to begin in the beginning of this speech especially, we told you that political empowerment and how the economy itself will be much better. In status quo, majority always win in status quo, right? This means that a country that is smaller, less majority on our side, because even if the majority still exists, the minority itself will be much stronger, because right now you don't have to fight as much as majority on your side, right? This means that the power will be much better. As a result of that, we have a better cater towards the minority on our side, then the employment and all the economics that they want to talk about will be more likely to happen on our side. This means that other than that, the supports will be better, because small countries now have small countries need smaller resources. The pressure the government, for example, that they have told you that half workers is not there to pressure the government, for example. That's the reason why the government will more likely to cater to you rather than on their side, because right now they don't listen to these particular people because the country itself is too big to be tackled to, for example, right? The last thing that we have told you is that it will remove the incentive to hegemon, because country is less likely to be bullied on our side. For all those reasons, I'm very proud to propose.
Thank you. Go ahead, officer.
Yeah.
To open up and give ability to liberalize independence is also to liberalize borderless interventions, outright discrimination against states that you can now target. This was the inherent and fundamental harm that was not engaged with by the premise of side government as a whole. Before I move on to tackle issues by closing and then opening, I just want to point out what must have been engaged from Felice's argument here. Felice told you that generally, that when power symmetries are made, for various reasons, these countries that are seceded are locked out. For reasons that are geographical, that is much harder for them to access economic trade and to access any political independence on their own, because by virtue, if you are surrounded by conservative states around you and you are liberal as a state, you will generally lose out or have it much harder to trade with another country that you must find, or another state that you must find that also has very similar and unique political or economic aspects that you would like to trade with. These are things that they would never make out or explain why these were still beneficial to these countries, because it just means that it made it much harder for smaller minority states to find their independence in comparison to bigger states that would have colluded among themselves according to the premise of side government. The benefit that was unique and exclusive that must have been engaged with, and that's what gives us the first in this round, is that states have a direct incentive to aid these minorities as well. Because if you're responsible for minorities, then that means you cannot allow for the oppression or direct oppressions that happen within your state, and you cannot be complicit with them, like dying or getting oppressed or not getting jobs in these worlds. I think it's very hard for you to map out those policies under side opposition, because you give a reason for states to be complicit and to earn responsibility towards that minority state itself, and other bigger states or bigger collusions don't have to worry about that. I think that was the fundamental flaw coming from side government. Now I'd like to move on to side closed government and view them in issues. No thanks. The first thing I'd like to engage with is about this idea of threats, and let's engage the premise here. So if the state is built on radicalism, then I don't think a lot of things can map this out. For example, states like North Korea that generally don't care about the international pressures that occur in them. If this is true, then I think there are tensions within their argument Why? Because you can't allow for full political empowerment according to their case, and also not expect radical threats or radical ideologies to come out. And you can't map these things out. What does this mean? This means that literally the reason why many countries secede or many states secede is because they reject the norms imposed by the international community or by mainstream community as well. And if they were to reject these fundamentalist ideas, I think you give them the chance of empowerment to become radical in many instances, and I think that this is the worst threat that can ever occur here. But let's talk about the outcomes and see whether they are reasonable, like having more resources to run on a focus group. I don't think that this happens because literally your human capital that could revolt against the state, I think won't occur for a few reasons. You can't threaten the state because you have a lack of human capital. A, because it's you are less likely to be heard out if you're in a small minority country. But secondly, you lose international sympathy because every time oppression happens in the international community, the international community is more likely to direct you to this minority state. Hey, how about you move there? Because that's where all the minority people are. So they avoid responsibility to deal with these international conflicts and tensions that occur within the minorities and avoid these things entirely as a whole. But they require us to prove that economies won't work on their side. I'll give you a few reasons that were really explicit in our case. Firstly, geographical proximity that makes it really hard for you to trade and more expensive for you to trade that leaves you at a wrong foot already. But secondly, the lack of resource as a result of land that's allocated to you. Because generally, if you're a minority country, you're less likely to be given the bigger resource land. But even if you do, you can't really do much with it because it means you have to spend more of that resource or you earn less profits as a result of those resources because everyone's capping you and boxing you out of that economy itself. But thirdly, in the event of a bankruptcy or anything happens to you, your reliance is basically on other small minorities that are very exclusive political and economic identifiers as you. And I think that these are very hard to find, but more or less, these countries or economies are less likely to be doing so well as well that you can rely on them. And I think that leaves you at a wrong foot. Closing government out already. But before that, I'll take a bit wide.
At the moment, the United States has pulled out from NAFTA, the TPP agreement, and left many small countries hanging. Why does a hegemon in your world get to justify that kind of action?
So hegemons leave, but other hegemons come in. China will come in and replace that. I think this is the beauty of big countries as well, that if one big country leaves, other big countries come in. I think that's a general economic argument that will replace itself and is generally systematic in nature as well. Let's deal with opening government as well. In terms of small countries, let's deal with issues here. The two situations we can see as a result of small countries and their military impact is that A, minorities will always be oppressed and they can't defend themselves because there's no military capacity for them to actually defend all the attacks that come on 360 around them. Or the second thing that could happen is if minority states still happen to be very radical and very white supremacists, I think that they'll channel all their resources to attack states specifically in instances where they don't like them. So white supremacists will be really bigoted towards particular states and they can be targeted. But in principle, if small countries still have the capacity with political standards of majoritarian politics, then that means that generally your EUs are able to seclude individuals that are not politically in line. For example, the EU has secluded individuals like Turkey from joining the EU because of their political inclinations that they do not support. I think these are the kind of rhetorics that you can enable or empower if you have the EU on your side as well, and if they do want to channel that soft case as a whole. But what happens as a whole to small countries? They are easy targets that no one will trade with you, or your radical states can identify you easier and oppress you much easier in those instances. Meaning, as a whole, your minority cultures will be more oppressed, or at least at the very most, less marketed as a whole. Meaning your minority cultures will die out as a result of that. And I think that they don't receive the benefit of cultures in their world. But what happens in their world in terms of visualizing? I think that it gives more reason to feel hate between these states. Like Pakistan and India, the moment that you have Kashmir in the middle, I think it gives them reason to fight over them and try to gain power from each other against Kashmir. I think that's the reason why Kashmir is actually in such a devastating state right now. But more importantly, I think you complicate the way unions work, because the more smaller states you have within bigger unions, that's when you generally have possibly more accurate views, but in light of those accurate views, you have a more complicated and blurred way of how you decide who to intervene, what to veto, and I think that these complications are the international relationships that could ever occur within these states. This is something that we cannot stand for, because this means that minority states lose out as a whole, but more rather that you give big international majoritarian politics a reason to oppress minorities.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to continue?
Maybe just close it.
Was it?
No.
No, I don't know.
Oh. Very nice, everyone. Thank you. Oh my God.